Hey everyone. So for today's lecture, we're going to be looking at imperialism. This is the era in American history when America begins to expand beyond the continental United States, begins to expand beyond those boundaries between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And what happens is this is seen as kind of a prestige thing in the worldwide viewpoint. You can really look at almost the colonization of America as a point of imperialism, as the British Empire expanding and getting colonies throughout the world. And what happens is in the 1700s, 1800s, European powers begin to expand and gain colonies throughout the world. So America is actually really late to the game, but once they begin to expand beyond the traditional boundaries, they become a worldwide power. And this is what really leads to this being the American century. America becomes a worldwide power during this period. So prior to the 1890s, the United States foreign policy was really isolationist. Remember, the United States government had been pretty small up until expansive during the Progressive era, and part of that, keeping a small government, was not having interests beyond North America. Remember the Monroe Doctrine? They stated that everything in the Western Hemisphere is our backyard. Europeans' power stay out of it, and we will stay out of your backyard, stay out of the rest of the world. So at this point, the United States, up until the 1890s, has no overseas colonies. However, this is about to change. U.S. foreign policy in the 1890s sets the stage for the modern era in which the U.S. is a global superpower. So we saw in the industrial era, the United States becomes a economic superpower, becomes the largest economy in the world. What happens in the 1890s? They begin to spread their influence beyond that continental United States, and they will grow into the global superpower that they are today. So what's also happened is European powers have gained colonies throughout the world, and they've used these colonies to advance their economies. They can use them for raw materials. There are also new markets. And so the United States, in particular, people within the United States start to see colonies as a way of expanding their influence, expanding prosperity, expanding commerce. So you could see that in this quote from Senator Albert Beveridge. Um, he is quoted here as saying there's so many real things to be done: canals to be dug, railways to be laid, forests to be felled, cities to be built, fields to be tilled, markets to be won, ships to be launched, peoples to be saved, civilization to be proclaimed, and the rag of liberty hung around the world. What he means by that is the American flag. It's time for America to spread its values, to spread its economy throughout the world. There's so many places that they could be doing this. They can make more money. They could spread all this. So this really becomes the idea, which had been an influence of European policy. And you can kind of see that depiction here in this political cartoon. You can see Uncle Sam riding the truck of progress, the civilization moving forward. You can see the goods. You can see cotton, dry goods. You see telegraph posts, all kinds of things that the United States has invented, but he's riding on a cliff, on a precipice. So it's very dangerous. And you can see here, there's a Chinese person sitting on top of a dragon, and he says 4 million barbarians. So basically, they're backwards. They're trying to stop this progress from going forward. And so what you see there on Uncle Sam's cannon says force if necessary, that they are going to force other people to progress, to advance the way they see it. So a big part of the reason for this is that colonies are seen as necessary for economic growth. And that comes down to the simple law of supply and demand. The U.S. needed more raw materials and more customers to feed its industrial economy. So it needs to expand beyond its borders. So here's a quote. So it says, in Cuba alone, there are 15 million acres of forests unacquainted with the axe, exhaustless mines of iron, and priceless deposits of manganese. The resources of Puerto Rico have only been trifled with. The riches of the Philippines have hardly been touched by the fingertips of modern methods. And they produce what we consume, and consume what we sell. So basically, it's opening up new markets. It's getting materials from these people and selling them those finished products. Very similar to that idea of mercantilism from the American colonies. That America will expand these colonies, take the raw materials, and sell them back the goods they make. But in order to obtain and secure new colonies and to compete in the world, the United States had to build up its military might. So what happens as a result of industrialization, this enables the United States to compete militarily around the globe. They're able to build things. They're able to build a better navy, a better army. And what that allows them to do is become a world player because there is competition militarily. A lot of places don't want to be colonized, so you have to do it by the sword, as it's showed in that cartoon. And this is really summed up in the early 1900s when Teddy Roosevelt authorizes the development of a new naval fleet filled with modern battleships and destroyers. And Roosevelt requires that these ships be painted white, and these are known as the Great White Fleet, and they actually sail around the world and kind of are showing off to other countries, being like, America's arrived. We're no longer just an economic power; we are now a military power. Part of the justification behind imperialism, behind colonization, is what would be known as white man's burden. This name is attributed to the poem by Rudyard Kipling, who wrote The Jungle Book, among other works. Kipling wrote this poem about the Philippine-American War, which lasted from 1899 to 1902, in which the Americans won and gained the Philippines as a colony. Basically, what Kipling is saying in this poem is that it is up to the civilized white people to carry the other races up the mountain, to build them up. They have advanced economically. Now we must help out the rest of the world. So you can see that depiction here with Uncle Sam carrying up clearly racist depictions of other races, of other people. But the idea is carrying up the hill to a better life. That is our responsibility as a white man's burden as an American. So this is a quote from Kipling's poem. It says, "Has God endowed us with gifts and marked us as the people of his peculiar favor, merely to rot in our own selfishness?" So you can see there's a clearly racist motive behind it, but there's also something that seems altruistic. Kipling's saying we have all these things, so white people have to go out in the world and help out everybody else. You can further see these depictions here in this political cartoon of the time. You can see Uncle Sam carrying all these things across: education, religion, steel, trains, different things. And you can see the Philippines as a stepping stone towards China. So the idea here is settle the Philippines and then move on to mainland China and civilize these people. So it's seen as like they're trying to do something. And again, we get quotes from Beveridge promoting these ideas. It says, "It is a mighty people that he, God, has planted on this soil, and a people sprung from the most masterful blood of history." And he also quote says, "We cannot fly from our world duties. It is ours to save that soil from liberty and civilization." So the ideas behind this, they want markets, but they are justifying it as that, hey, we're saving these people. We're bringing them all these things. And so there are clearly racial undertones, not even undertones. This is clearly a racist policy in a lot of ways. And you can see that in the depiction of the cartoon. But the idea is these are new opportunities. The colonies and weak countries could be claimed easily. Could be claimed for military goals and economic goals. And the idea here is that these people could be captured or could be taken over because they're culturally inferior. And a lot of times that's based in racism. So you can see here this political cartoon, the depiction of Uncle Sam here lecturing. You can see the good kids, the white kids in the back. They're California, New York. These are the states, are civilized. You can see here colonies, which will become colonies of the United States. The Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Cuba. Of course, different race, looking unruly. Uncle Sam seems to be yelling him. You can also see the racist depiction of a Chinese person looking inside, and then the picture of an American Indian, a Native American, holding the book upside down. So you can see kind of the racist ideas behind these. And Uncle Sam, the white man, is going to civilize these people and bring them to civilization. But the idea is that this is also heavy-handed. Imperialism, these ideas, is really disguised as compassion. They're saying they're supposedly concerned about the country's welfare, but in reality, they're trying to gain military and economic might. The United States is pursuing its own goals. And you can see that here, again, in a political cartoon. You can see the bayonet holding liberty and civilization, and you can see what looks like a native person of maybe the Caribbean is being pushed against the rock. So it's saying you don't have an option. Liberty, freedom, but here it is at a knife point. So the United States in the 1890s and early 1900s begins to focus colonial expansion on two areas: Latin America and the Far East, as we saw with the Philippines and those depictions in China, but in particular Latin America in its the United States backyard in the Western Hemisphere. And you can see that in the depiction here of this cartoon. You can see Uncle Sam basically represented as the United States getting ready to swallow up Cuba. So what happens is priorities become focused on expansion in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Panama. The first large war of American expansion was the Spanish-American War. Um, this war began in 1898, and it was actually the United States became involved in what was the Cuban War of Independence. So the Cuban people were fighting against the Spanish for independence. And in 1898, a U.S. warship, the USS Maine, exploded in Havana Harbor in Cuba, and the United States blamed this on the Spanish and declared war on them. Later on, it was found out it was actually an internal explosion. Some munitions inside the ship exploded, so the Spanish actually never got involved. We're actually not involved, but nonetheless, the United States went to war with Spain and won. And this expanded America's reach. And Secretary of State John Hay is quoted as saying this was a splendid little war. It defeated a European power and was able to expand. As a result of the Spanish-American War, the United States gained new possessions. They annexed Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico became part of the United States, and they also claimed the right to intervene in Cuba. So Cuba gained its independence, but the United States claimed the right to intervene when they felt justified. And you can see that depiction here of Uncle Sam again, looking at a menu. You can see Cuba, you can see Puerto Rico, you see the Philippines. And so he just basically like, what does Uncle Sam want now? What does the United States want to take? The United States then turns its attention to digging a canal in Panama, in the logical place here in the Isthmus of Central America. And the idea here is that this could really help American commerce. You have to think, to get their goods from the East Coast to the Pacific, they would have to go all the way around the bottom of South America. So they want to be able to gain this territory. You can see this depicted here in President William McKinley. And you can see him got his pickaxe. He's getting ready to dig a canal, rolling his sleeves up. Uncle Sam's got the shovels, excuse me. And you can see all the flags, everything, the ships lining up. So the United States sees the value of building this canal and begins to focus its energy there. President McKinley is assassinated, and Teddy Roosevelt comes to power after him. And Roosevelt really sets his sights on gaining this area, and he wants to build the canal. It's great for American commerce. So Roosevelt goes to the Colombia government. At this point, Panama is not a separate country. It's actually a region of Colombia, and asks to buy rights to build a canal there. Colombia refuses to sell canal rights to the United States. So what Roosevelt does, he backs a Panamanian force and a Panamanian government to rebel and fight for independence. They do. They win their independence, and the United States is the first country to recognize them as an independent country. And part of this is they gain those rights to the canal. So they help out these people gain independent country, and in exchange, they say, yeah, you can build the canal. So what happens is America is really dominating the Western Hemisphere now, in particular Latin America. And you can see that in the depiction here of Teddy Roosevelt walking around with his big stick, his shoes off through the Caribbean, dragging his great white fleet wherever he goes. So he take over. And what happens is this doctrine of American dominance is known as the Roosevelt Corollary. And corollary is basically an addition. And what this is an addition to the Monroe Doctrine. Remember, the Monroe Doctrine from the 1820s basically said that the Western Hemisphere is America's area. European powers stay out of it. What the Roosevelt Corollary does is say that actually the Western Hemisphere, the United States now becomes the policeman of the Western Hemisphere. So any conflict, anything that happens, the United States has the right to intervene, to become involved, and to take over territory. America also uses not just military might, but they also use the power of their economy in what can be known as dollar diplomacy. And this is really encouraged by President William Howard Taft, who follows President Roosevelt. And Taft really encourages businessmen and banks to invest in Latin America. And that is the idea that they're going to give economic support, they're going to grow their economy, but that economy is going to be tied to the United States, tied to the dollar. And also, Taft promised military support for these countries. So if you work with us, if you use our goods, if you buy our goods, we will also give you military support. So it's really gaining more influence throughout the region. And the United States also begins to pursue a similar policy in the Far East, in areas such as the Philippines and Guam, and in particular in China. China is a big prize. China is a large country. It has a lot of natural resources and a lot of population, and is also a little backwards compared to some of these European powers, compared to Russia, compared to Japan, and so they're all kind of trying to gain advantage in China. So what the Americans do is initiate what is known as the open door policy. And it's kind of the same thing. They want to have an open trade with China. So they propose that all countries should trade freely in China. They should get rid of all tariffs, get rid of everything. Everyone should open up, should be able to trade freely. And what they claim is that this will open up fair competition, that everyone will be able to help out the Chinese, that it'll all work itself out. You remember the idea of fairness within open markets, and the idea behind this too is that America says like, hey, we'll obey the Chinese laws. This will be good for the Chinese. But in reality, what the open door policy is trying to do is America is trying to gain influence over other European powers in China. You could see that depiction here in this cartoon. It's not that they're really trying to help China. They're basically trying to exploit China. The European powers in Japan want to cut China up and gain its resources. So you can see that here. You can see the picture of the Queen, England, the Kaiser, the Tsar of Russia, the Emperor of Japan, everyone looking at it and carving up a piece of China. So the idea here is America's trying to get in part of this pie. They want part of China, and that's what they're promoting, the open door policy. Basically, it seemed like they want to help out, but they really just want to get in there. So as a result of the Spanish-American War, the United States liberated the Philippines and Guam, territories in the South Pacific that had been Spanish colonies. So they're liberated with that victory over Spain. The United States promised them independence. However, they annexed them instead. They become part of the United States. And the justification for that is, again, part of that idea of the white man's burden. What is quoted said is, would not the people of the Philippines prefer the just, humane, civilizing government of this republic to the savage, bloody rule of pillage and extortion from which we have rescued them? They're basically saying, we sold you independence, but we rescued you, and our way's better. So like we should probably just like take over. So the idea here is the United States is gaining territory throughout the world. So the annexation of the Philippines is actually maybe the low point during this American imperialism. What happens is the Filipinos want to be free. Many of them do not want to be ruled by another power. So they revolt against American annexation. It leads to a guerrilla war, which lasts about 14 years, and about 1/6 of the Filipino population is killed in this conflict. So the American military is fighting openly with the guerrilla warfare. And you can really see the really dark point here is what's known as the Balangiga massacre, the Balangiga massacre. And this happens when, in response, guerrillas killed 48 American soldiers in a surprise attack. In response, General Jacob Smith ordered, "I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me." And so what they did is go into this village and they executed everyone above the age of 10. So you can see the idea is here, we're going to save these people. We're bringing civilization. But in reality, they're murdering people. They're killing people. People are fighting for their independence. So it's really a dark chapter. The United States also gains the territory of Hawaii by overthrowing the Queen in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and this began around in 1893. The United States supports foreign residents residing in Hawaii. Also, American citizens helped to depose the Queen, remove her from power, and annex the country. Hawaii becomes an American colony. And this is good for U.S. military bases and sugar growers. The United States can put a base in Hawaii, in particular Pearl Harbor, and it helps sugar growers. People can grow sugar in Hawaii, so this becomes an important territory of the United States. So while this might not have been great for the native Hawaiians, for Americans, they often see this as a great thing. They gain another territory. They're gaining greater influence, greater economic power throughout the world. And Hawaii will eventually become the 50th state in 1959. But before that, it'll be an American territory. So what we see during this period is just really the expansion of American power, the expansion of American economic power, American military power to expand throughout the world. And this will be a growing theme throughout this upcoming century and throughout up until our modern era, really.